In 1977, Colares Island rested in a world of its own, tucked away from the fast-paced march of modern life. The small Brazilian island was home to quiet shores and a close-knit community bound by familiar routines and nightly gatherings. Yet one autumn evening, something strange pierced the calm. A light in the night sky, brilliant and unnatural, cutting through the dark oceanic expanse. At first, it was a curiosity, an odd light hovering above the water, casting a pale glow onto the waves. But the strange lights grew bolder, appearing not just over the water but over homes, over roads, flickering over people themselves. And soon, a chilling pattern emerged. This was no distant phenomenon. The lights seemed to watch, to follow, to hunt. Reports spread of beams shining down from the sky, striking people like a curse from above. And the beams did more than startle. Accounts described inexplicable injuries. Locals stumbled away from encounters with burns, mysterious puncture wounds, and debilitating weakness. A few victims fell ill and, in some cases, never recovered. What was this force in the sky? And why did it seem so intent on the islanders, leaving its chilling mark on the people below? This is no ordinary UFO story. It's not just lights in the sky or passing glimpses of strange shapes. Colares Island became a living nightmare, where the fear wasn't only in the imagination. It lingered in the injuries, in the anxious looks of those who had seen the lights and felt their touch. Welcome to the mystery of Colares, where the scars of 1977 still speak. It began as an oddity, a curious light glowing steadily above the waves near Colares Island. The people who noticed it at first simply stared, transfixed, their minds racing to identify what could cause such a phenomenon. Fishermen and villagers accustomed to the predictable, even humdrum pace of island life noted it, gossiped about it, and eventually began to anticipate its arrival each night. Yet no one was prepared for how deeply this strange light would change their lives. In the beginning, the light seemed innocuous, drifting slowly over the open ocean, keeping its distance from the island itself. But the longer it lingered, the more it drew people's attention. Those who had seen it claimed that it seemed to watch them, hovering at a safe distance before finally vanishing into the dark. Then, slowly but surely, its behavior began to change. The light crept closer to shore, dancing over the coastal waters and moving inland. The mystery grew, and so did the crowd of nightly onlookers. Families would sit on porches, staring into the night sky, waiting for the light to return. Children whispered to each other about what it might be, a spirit perhaps, or some ancient force awakened from the depths. The initial curiosity was tinged with awe, but that awe would soon turn to fear. The lights began to appear in pairs, sometimes in trios, forming patterns that seemed to communicate with one another, flickering in unison as they hovered over the water. And when they did, the night was silent, as if every other sound had receded, leaving only the soft, eerie glow of these foreign lights. It wasn't long before the lights ventured directly over the island. One witness recounted how the light drifted directly above his house, so close that he could make out a strange halo surrounding it. Another local, a fisherman who had grown up facing the dangers of the Atlantic, admitted that the lights made him feel like prey, as though he were being observed by an intelligence beyond his understanding. Then came the first reports of injury. What was previously a distant curiosity quickly became a menacing presence. People began to describe strange beams shooting from the lights, beams that targeted individuals with alarming precision. These beams, witnesses said, were no ordinary lights. They carried a heat, a sharp, searing intensity that left burns on the skin and, even worse, unexplained marks that punctured the skin as though from some surgical instrument. The people of Colares knew the difference between accidents and intentional harm. And these injuries were nothing accidental. They called the phenomenon chupa-chupa, which means suck-suck in Portuguese, because the beams seemed to drain life from those they touched. Victims often described a profound weakness after exposure, a bone-deep exhaustion that left them bedridden for days. Doctors and villagers alike were horrified and puzzled. How could a mere light cause physical harm? What kind of energy or force could burn flesh, puncture skin, and cause such bizarre symptoms? One of the first victims was a young woman, known to her neighbors for her steady calm. She had been closing her windows one evening when she noticed a bright orb floating in the distance, just beyond her backyard. Within seconds, a beam shot down from the light and struck her. The pain was immediate, an intense, fiery sensation that left her gasping. When the light faded, she found herself marked by small red burns that covered her chest. She struggled back into her house, weak and disoriented, collapsing soon after. Her account spread quickly through the island. It was no longer a question of what the lights were, it was a question of who would be next. The local clinic began to see more cases like hers: burns, puncture wounds, feverish symptoms that no doctor could explain. A fisherman returned home with similar marks, saying that a light had followed him from the beach, locking onto him with a blinding beam that left him paralyzed with terror. The doctors, usually accustomed to treating minor ailments, were now faced with injuries they had no context for, no language to describe. And for each new victim, the symptoms were strangely consistent: heat, puncture marks, fatigue, and a feeling that something vital had been drained. Unable to explain the injuries or offer any reassurance, the doctors could only watch helplessly as their patients came to them, their faces bearing the same look of terror. The island fell into a state of quiet panic. Gone were the gatherings on porches, the late-night strolls, the quiet buzz of social life. Doors were now bolted shut by sundown. Neighbors banded together, organizing small watch groups to scan the skies, desperate to protect their families. Families clutched amulets, hung symbols of protection in their windows, and huddled close, every creak or rustle sending a shiver down their spines. In a community bound by shared fears and superstitions, the rumors began to take on a life of their own. Some believed the lights were a punishment, a curse called down by some unspoken sin. Others thought of them as a supernatural force, a vengeful spirit sent to collect souls. Yet there were those who spoke in hushed voices of something else, something not of this earth, something that defied any explanation they could offer. Fear turned the island into a place of constant vigilance. Those brave enough to venture outside at night did so with heads down, avoiding any open spaces. Even fishermen, usually undeterred by the rough waters of the Atlantic, stayed close to shore, afraid that the lights would find them vulnerable on the open sea. Every night, people watched the skies with desperate anticipation, praying that the lights would stay away. But the lights did not stay away. They returned, each night more relentless than the last, as though testing the islanders, searching for something only they understood. The sightings increased, and so did the encounters. For the people of Colares, this was no ordinary mystery. It was a siege, an invasion from above, with an intent and intelligence that remained as unfathomable as it was terrifying. And so, the people of Colares were left to confront the horror that had descended on their peaceful lives. The injuries, the puncture wounds, the feverish symptoms, the strange burns. They were no longer just a strange occurrence. They were proof of something far beyond their comprehension, something that seemed to reach down from the stars with a silent, predatory intent. The Brazilian military had heard the stories, tales of strange lights hunting villagers, of beams that burned skin and drained strength. These were the kinds of reports officials might have ignored in another time, dismissing them as folklore or the superstitions of a remote community. But by late 1977, the incidents on Colares Island were more than rumor. They had escalated into a full-blown crisis, with terrified civilians demanding answers from the government. Colares, once a peaceful fishing island, had become a place of fear and mystery, a place where people glanced upward not in reverence, but in terror. The Brazilian Air Force could no longer ignore it. Operação Prato, Operation Saucer, was launched in November 1977 under the command of Captain Uirangue Bolivar Soares Nogueira de Holanda Lima. With a reputation as a level-headed officer and a well-regarded career in the Brazilian Air Force, Captain Holanda was tasked with investigating, and perhaps more importantly, controlling the growing panic on Colares. Officially, the operation was an inquiry into unexplained aerial phenomena. Unofficially, it was clear the military aimed to put an end to the public's hysteria, to provide plausible explanations, no matter how thin, for the strange occurrences. The initial approach was one of strategic skepticism. Captain Holanda and his team arrived with a dual mission: to collect evidence and to contain public fear. The first step was simple: reassure the public. To the people of Colares, the military presence suggested that the authorities were taking their concerns seriously, that someone in power was finally listening. Uniformed soldiers patrolled the streets, their presence designed to project calm and security. Flyers were distributed, warning residents to remain vigilant, but assuring them that the military was investigating and that no cause for alarm had yet been determined. Behind the scenes, however, there was less certainty. The official line was that the phenomena could be explained as natural occurrences, perhaps tricks of light on the water, atmospheric anomalies, or even mass hallucinations fueled by local superstition. Yet the more they witnessed, the harder it was for the team to maintain their skepticism. On their first night of active investigation, the military team set up camp along the coastline, hoping to observe the lights in action. They had their cameras ready, notebooks open, and eyes trained on the horizon, prepared to document any anomalies. Hours passed, and the darkness remained undisturbed. Just when they were beginning to consider packing up for the night, it happened. A bright light, unmistakable and alarmingly close, appeared over the water. It moved with an intelligence that no natural phenomenon could claim, gliding in calculated patterns, pausing, and then changing direction suddenly, as if aware it was being watched. The soldiers, trained in the art of combat and strategy, found themselves at a loss. They could only watch, transfixed, as the light performed its eerie dance above the waves. The team began collecting evidence systematically. Photographs were taken, diagrams sketched, and radar equipment deployed. Captain Holanda, always methodical, took careful notes of each sighting and each encounter. What he hoped to provide to his superiors was not a report filled with fearful anecdotes, but hard data, a compilation of indisputable evidence. And yet, despite their efforts, the findings only deepened the mystery. Radar equipment picked up unidentifiable signals, blips that appeared and vanished without warning, moving at speeds and in patterns no aircraft could replicate. The official stance of the military remained one of cautious skepticism, but within the ranks of Operation Saucer, tensions began to grow. Soldiers who had initially mocked the reports now whispered of their own sightings, of lights that had followed them, of beams that seemed to target them directly. Some claimed they felt the heat of the beams, even through layers of uniform, a sensation that filled them with a primal fear they would never admit to openly. The atmosphere was thick with an unspoken dread, a collective fear that gnawed at the soldiers as they continued their night watches. Evidence continued to accumulate. The team documented sightings nearly every night, drawing sketches of the light's movements and noting the times and locations with the precision of a military exercise. Over time, patterns began to emerge. The lights appeared most often near the water, usually in the early hours of the morning. They followed specific paths, moving along invisible lines that the team could only guess at, stopping at certain points as if to survey the ground below before vanishing as quickly as they'd come. One night, Captain Hollander himself experienced something that would forever challenge his understanding of reality. He had been stationed near a remote part of the coastline, away from the usual activity, hoping for a closer look at the lights. Around midnight, a soft glow appeared on the horizon, growing brighter as it approached. The light was blinding, a pure white beam that fell upon his position with an intensity that forced him to shield his eyes. He could feel the warmth from the beam, an unnatural heat that made him stumble back. For a brief moment, he stood frozen, engulfed in a light that seemed to defy every law of nature he had been taught. When it finally disappeared, he was left standing alone in the darkness, shaken and unable to rationalize what he had seen. The reports filed by the team grew stranger with each passing night. The soldiers reported a range of experiences that defied logical explanation. Some spoke of feeling a presence, an intelligence that watched them from above. Others described strange sounds that accompanied the lights, low hums that resonated in their chests and lingered in their minds long after the lights had vanished. Each report was recorded, each detail catalogued with the meticulousness of a military operation, yet none of it seemed to add up. As weeks passed, Captain Hollander's initial skepticism began to erode. He had come to Colares with the expectation that he would debunk the locals' tales, that he would walk away with a report that explained everything in scientific terms. But what he encountered defied explanation, challenging the very framework of his understanding. He found himself poring over the evidence late into the night, reviewing sketches and radar readings, unable to shake the feeling that there was more to these lights than anyone could grasp. In addition to eyewitness reports, the team collected physical evidence. They documented unusual electromagnetic interference, noting that their radios would often crackle and distort whenever the lights appeared. Compasses went haywire, their needles spinning wildly before settling in the wrong direction. Instruments would fail without reason, and watches would lose time. These weren't isolated incidents, but patterns that repeated, adding layers of complexity to an already baffling case. The more evidence they gathered, the less sense it seemed to make. How could beams of light interfere with electronics? How could they cause such precise injuries? The soldiers themselves became subjects of their own investigation, haunted by encounters that went beyond physical sightings. Some spoke of strange dreams that followed their encounters with the lights, dreams filled with scenes of bright, blinding light and sensations of weightlessness. These experiences, unsettling and strange, further deepened the mystery surrounding Operation Saucer. Rumors circulated among the team, with some suggesting that the lights might not just be watching, but communicating in ways beyond human understanding. As the weeks passed, the focus of Operation Saucer shifted subtly. What had begun as a mission to debunk and reassure became a hunt for answers, an investigation into the unknown. Even the military command in Belém, far removed from the island, began to pay closer attention as the reports poured in. What Captain Hollander and his men were experiencing went far beyond the scope of any typical investigation. Yet despite the mounting evidence, there was still no clear answer. The lights remained elusive, defying every attempt to categorize or contain them. Each night brought new sightings, new encounters, and a growing sense of helplessness among the soldiers. They had come to Colares as protectors, charged with calming a frightened population, but they were quickly realizing they were powerless against this force, whatever it was. Operation Saucer was meant to end the mystery, to provide a rational explanation that would ease the public's fears. Instead, it plunged the investigators deeper into uncertainty, blurring the lines between fact and the unknown. The Colares incident continues to fascinate and confound, not only because of its high strangeness, but also due to the sheer range of theories that have emerged. The light's behaviors, the injuries, and the psychological toll on witnesses all raise questions that no single theory fully satisfies. Was this a close encounter with extraterrestrial beings? An atmospheric marvel? A case of Cold War technology tests gone wrong? Or something else entirely? For many, the light's movements, quick changes in direction, hovering and sometimes following people, suggested intelligence, hinting at technology beyond human capability. Reports of radar readings showing objects that appeared, moved in erratic patterns, and vanished instantaneously pointed to technology that would be revolutionary even by modern standards. But why would extraterrestrial beings focus on a remote fishing village like Colares? One popular theory is that these lights could be part of a reconnaissance mission or scientific survey, studying Earth's biodiversity or the human species. Colares, located off Brazil's tropical coast, might have held some specific environmental interest. Proponents of this hypothesis argue that the injuries were incidental, an unfortunate side effect of technologies not designed for human interaction. Some suggest the encounters were not accidents, but rather experiments. The burns, puncture marks, and prolonged weakness experienced by residents seemed deliberate to some researchers. Perhaps these lights were part of a biological study, with humans unknowingly serving as test subjects. The specificity of the injuries suggested some kind of systematic process, leading some to suspect that Colares was chosen precisely because of its remoteness, allowing extraterrestrial visitors to study humans away from major populations or prying eyes. This theory draws on the broader history of alleged UFO interactions with humans, where individuals report encounters that feel scientific in nature, as though they were examined by beings from beyond. There is a more benign twist to the alien hypothesis that suggests these encounters were accidents, not attacks. If the lights were indeed extraterrestrial, it's possible their beams were merely tools designed to collect environmental data. In this version of events, the residents of Colares simply stumbled into the beam's path, experiencing unintended side effects. Perhaps these beams were designed to interact with Earth's atmosphere, the ocean, or even to communicate across distances, with humans suffering unintended exposure. This hypothesis, while comforting to some, does little to explain the targeted nature of some attacks, where individuals reported being followed by lights or struck by beams in vulnerable areas like the chest and head. As scientists and skeptics began analyzing the case, they proposed natural causes for the events on Colares. Atmospheric phenomena can sometimes produce strange lights, and in the right conditions even appear to move in unpredictable ways. Ball lightning, for instance, manifests as floating orbs of light, often during thunderstorms, and can last several seconds as it drifts through the air. Witnesses often describe it as eerily silent, moving erratically before fading out. Some wondered if the lights over Colares could have been an unusually long-lasting display of ball lightning. However, ball lightning is extremely rare and has never been documented to cause burns or physical injuries. Plasma, a state of matter where gases become charged and emit light, was another proposed explanation. Plasma orbs are sometimes visible in the right atmospheric conditions, particularly near bodies of water or areas with high humidity. Some scientists believe that electromagnetic conditions around Colares, combined with the tropical climate, might have created glowing orbs that hovered and drifted like those reported by witnesses. Yet, even this theory fails to account for the specific injuries, as plasma phenomena are not known to burn or puncture human skin. Another intriguing hypothesis is based on an unusual form of energy emission, similar to the phenomenon of St. Elmo's fire. Sailors and mountaineers have long documented sightings of this bluish or violet glow, which is caused by ionized air surrounding pointed objects during storms. While St. Elmo's fire has a ghostly appearance, it typically clings to stationary objects like masts or mountain peaks and doesn't float or chase people. The lights at Colares, however, were seen moving over houses, across beaches, and even following people through town, which makes St. Elmo's fire an unlikely fit. Then there are comparisons to other mysterious lights seen around the world. The Hessdalen lights, a well-known phenomenon in Norway's remote Hessdalen Valley, have mystified scientists and locals for decades. These lights often appear in the valley at night, sometimes hovering, and other times streaking across the sky. Like Colares, Hessdalen is an isolated area, and the light's erratic behavior has defied straightforward scientific explanation. Some researchers have suggested that both Colares and Hessdalen might be locations where unique geological factors create electromagnetic conditions that manifest as lights. However, no geological theory explains the physical injuries at Colares, which makes this theory incomplete at best. Psychologists and sociologists, on the other hand, offer an entirely different perspective, suggesting that the events in Colares could be partially explained as a case of mass hysteria or contagious fear. In times of extreme stress or perceived danger, isolated communities can sometimes develop collective anxieties that spread like wildfire. This phenomenon, known as mass psychogenic illness, has been documented throughout history and often involves physical symptoms like weakness, nausea, and even skin marks, which can appear due to self-inflicted scratching or intense psychosomatic responses. Some skeptics argued that the fear of lights, combined with the sense of being watched, may have fueled a group dynamic where people unconsciously manifested symptoms and reinforced each other's fears. However, this theory is limited by the physical evidence. Medical records show that residents of Colares were treated for burns, puncture wounds, and other injuries that cannot easily be dismissed as psychosomatic. Additionally, many reports came from military personnel who witnessed the lights firsthand and experienced similar fear and bewilderment. While mass psychogenic illness could amplify fear, it does not account for the burns, radar anomalies, or malfunctioning electronics documented during Operação Prato. If the lights were not extraterrestrial, atmospheric, or psychological, some theorists argued they might have been man-made. With the Cold War underway, both the US and Soviet Union were developing technologies to gain military advantage, including experimental aircraft, drones, and electromagnetic weaponry. Both superpowers were engaged in covert operations worldwide, and some researchers have speculated that Colares might have been an unintended testing ground for experimental technology. Given the secrecy of the era, it's possible that prototypes of unmanned aerial devices or directed energy weapons were tested in remote areas, where they would be less likely to draw attention. The United States and the Soviet Union were known to test energy-based technologies that could theoretically produce beams of light capable of causing burns. Some directed energy weapons rely on concentrated beams to disrupt electronic equipment or incapacitate targets temporarily. If such technology had been tested near Colares, it might explain the burns, electronic interference, and radar disturbances reported during the sightings. In this version of events, the people of Colares were merely caught in the crossfire of superpower experimentation. Some extend this theory to suggest that the lights were part of an experiment in psychological warfare, designed to test how isolated populations might respond to a perceived extraterrestrial threat. The Cold War was rife with attempts to gain the psychological upper hand, and several declassified projects show that governments were willing to experiment with mind-altering substances and fear tactics to study their effects. In this theory, Colares residents were subjected to psychological manipulation through lights, sounds, and possibly even controlled beams, all intended to measure fear response. But while this theory is intriguing, it faces challenges. First, there is no documented evidence that any government ever tested energy weapons on civilian populations in Brazil, and Brazil was not known to have collaborated with either the US or Soviet Union on such projects. Additionally, the military reports from Operação Prato contain no indication of a cover-up or awareness of secret technology. If the lights were indeed the result of human experimentation, they left little in the way of traceable proof. Some have suggested that the truth of Colares might lie in a combination of factors rather than a single cause. Perhaps natural phenomena like plasma lights attracted attention from foreign governments or covert organizations, leading to monitoring and potentially experimental tests. Or perhaps Colares became a site where UFO sightings, combined with psychological stress and secrecy, produced a case too complex for any single theory to explain. There is even a theory that the lights represented a rare intersection of natural phenomena with heightened psychological and political tension, creating an atmosphere ripe for misinterpretation and fear. In the end, the Colares mystery remains as compelling as it is unsolved. Each theory leaves some aspect unexplained, hinting that perhaps the truth involves more than our science or history can currently reveal. As suddenly as it began, Operação Prato came to a close. In December 1977, just months after it was launched, the Brazilian military halted the investigation, packed up its equipment, and withdrew from Colares Island, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. Officially, there was no grand explanation, no detailed report or conclusive findings. To the residents who had spent months under a shroud of fear, the abrupt end to the operation seemed almost as baffling as the lights themselves. After nights spent gathering data, documenting injuries, and observing phenomena that defied logic, the military issued a vague statement suggesting that the incidents in Colares were either exaggerated or misinterpreted. Then, without further elaboration, they left. For the locals, the military's departure was a mixed blessing. Some felt relieved, perhaps believing that the worst was over, that the lights would fade into memory now that the soldiers were gone. But others felt an uneasy abandonment, as if the island were being left to fend for itself against an unknown threat. Rumors ran wild, sparking debates in village gatherings and households alike. Had the military uncovered something too dangerous to reveal, or had they simply lost interest in what they could not explain? The official silence only fueled the islanders' suspicions. The public explanation leaned toward natural phenomena, an attempt to appease the villagers by attributing the events to rare but ultimately harmless environmental occurrences. But behind the scenes, military insiders whispered of different reasons for the shutdown. Some suggested that the operation had been ordered to stop from above, that higher-ranking officials were uncomfortable with the team's findings and had decided to bury the results. Others speculated that the military had encountered something too inexplicable, something that rattled even hardened officers, prompting a hasty retreat. Whatever the true reason, the abrupt halt of Operação Prato left a vacuum, and in that empty space, rumors grew, taking on lives of their own. In the years that followed, the military's stance on Colares became one of avoidance. Officials remained tight-lipped, offering no further insights. The report filed by Operação Prato was sparse, containing basic descriptions of sightings and a few blurry photographs, but little in the way of explanations. Many of the soldiers who had participated in the operation went back to their usual duties, blending back into the routines of military life. For them, it was a bizarre chapter they were instructed to close and not revisit. But whispers lingered, persistent as the memories of the lights themselves. Some members of the Operação Prato team began to confide in friends and family, recounting strange experiences they could not forget. Although their accounts were often shared in private, a few dared to speak publicly, defying orders to remain silent. Captain Uirange Holanda, who led the operation, became one of the most notable voices, breaking his silence in interviews years after the events on Colares. His words would cast a long shadow over the official narrative and forever alter the story of the Colares incident. Captain Holanda's testimony was unnerving, hinting at events far stranger than what had been officially recorded. In a candid interview decades after Operação Prato, Holanda described his encounters with the lights in unsettling detail. He spoke of watching objects that defied the laws of physics, hovering in silence, then accelerating at impossible speeds. Holanda admitted to witnessing lights that seemed to observe him and his men directly, sometimes approaching with what he described as intentionality. He even claimed that some of his men had been directly targeted by beams of light, though he had initially hesitated to include these reports in his official logs, wary of the skepticism they would invite. Hollander's revelations went even deeper. He recounted nights when he felt an overwhelming sense of dread, an instinctual fear that went beyond the usual nerves of a field mission. He confessed to feeling watched, as though the lights were studying him just as intensely as he was studying them. His descriptions painted a picture of a man caught in a standoff with forces he could neither understand nor control. And Hollander was not alone in his account. Other former operatives, though less vocal, privately corroborated aspects of his testimony, describing incidents that mirrored his unsettling encounters. One of the most striking revelations from these former military personnel was their shared sense that Operação Prato had been closed prematurely. Some speculated that their superiors feared the psychological toll the mission was taking on the team, while others believed that the findings were becoming too difficult to keep contained. Whatever the case, the statements from these military whistleblowers added a haunting layer to an already mysterious case. These testimonies suggested that the lights weren't just random phenomena, but something more deliberate, something aware of the humans who observed them. In the years following Hollander's interview, his account gained traction, attracting the attention of UFO researchers and sparking a wave of renewed interest in the Colares incident. Skeptics and believers alike were drawn to Hollander's story, dissecting his words and searching for hidden meanings. Some pointed to his testimony as definitive proof that Colares had experienced a genuine extraterrestrial encounter. Others, however, questioned Hollander's mental state, noting that the pressures of such a bizarre assignment could easily have influenced his perceptions. But whatever one believed about Hollander's account, there was no denying the weight it added to the mystery of Operação Prato. His statements cast a long shadow over the case, suggesting that the military's official explanations were only part of a much larger story. The effect of these revelations on the Colares case was profound. For researchers, Hollander's testimony offered a tantalizing glimpse behind the military's wall of secrecy, validating suspicions that the operation had uncovered more than it had ever revealed. UFO researchers began scrutinizing every detail of the case, scouring military archives and interviewing anyone who had connections to the operation. Hollander's words served as a rallying cry, inspiring a new generation of investigators to question the official story and search for evidence hidden in classified files. Among the residents of Colares, Hollander's testimony rekindled memories and reignited old fears. For those who had witnessed the lights and suffered their effects, the captain's words validated their experiences, confirming that they had not imagined the strange events. In the eyes of the villagers, Hollander was a hero of sorts, a man willing to speak the truth despite the consequences. His revelations helped ease the lingering trauma, offering a sense of validation to those who had spent years doubting their own memories. And yet, Hollander's story came with a price. Shortly after giving his interview, he was found dead under suspicious circumstances, his death officially ruled as suicide. To those who believed in his testimony, his death was a chilling twist, a tragic end that fueled further suspicions of a cover-up. Was Hollander silenced to protect secrets he had unwittingly exposed? Or was his death a tragic outcome of the psychological burden he had carried since Operação Prato? The legacy of Operação Prato and the mystery of the Colares lights lives on. For some, it stands as proof of extraterrestrial visitation, a case where the evidence was clear but suppressed. For others, it remains an unsolved enigma, a tantalizing puzzle filled with strange phenomena and unsettling testimonies, yet never fully conclusive. The Brazilian government has maintained its silence on the matter, refusing to comment further while researchers continue to press for declassification of military records, hoping that hidden answers may yet come to light. Colares, once a quiet island, has since become a focal point in UFO research, a place visited by investigators, historians, and paranormal enthusiasts who come to trace the steps of Hollander and his team. To the people of Colares, however, the lights are more than a mystery or an object of fascination. They are memories, remnants of a haunting experience that left scars on a generation. Some residents still refuse to discuss the events, believing that talking about them might somehow invite the lights back. Others are more open, recounting their encounters with a tone of resignation, as though they have accepted that they will never truly understand what they witnessed. In the years that have passed, the Colares case has taken on a life of its own. Researchers continue to debate the evidence, holding conferences, publishing articles, and sharing theories about what might have transpired on that isolated island. Each new account, each shred of evidence adds layers to a story that grows only more complex with time. What remains are fragments, a retired captain's haunting confession, a community's memories of nights spent in fear, and a scattering of classified documents that hint at answers but refuse to tell the full story. For now, the truth remains elusive, hidden behind layers of official silence, speculative theories, and the memories of those who lived through the events. The lights that appeared over Colares in 1977 have faded from the sky, but they continue to cast a long shadow, reminding all who seek answers that some mysteries refuse to be fully understood. The Colares incident continues to linger in the collective consciousness, not just as a chapter of unexplained phenomena, but as a living mystery that defies resolution. For those in the field of ufology, Colares is a perfect storm of verifiable data, military records, and community impact, a case that resists neat categorization and challenges the limits of conventional theories. The Colares incident represents for many evidence of a non-human intelligence interacting directly with humans. Unlike cases that rely solely on distant sightings or lights in the sky, the physical effects of Colares lights suggest a more invasive presence, a phenomenon that reached directly into people's lives and bodies. Paranormal researchers argue that Colares offers evidence of direct contact, evidence that supports theories of otherworldly or interdimensional beings operating for purposes unknown. Internationally, Colares has earned a place among the world's most documented UFO incidents, compared to cases like Roswell and Rendlesham Forest. Conferences dedicated to the Colares incident draw believers, skeptics, and experts who pore over old photographs, analyze military documents, and discuss the lingering impact of the events. Beyond the scientific and paranormal perspectives, the Colares incident has seeped deeply into Brazilian culture and folklore, becoming part of the nation's shared storytelling. In Colares and surrounding regions, the phrase "as luzes de Colares," the lights of Colares, evokes fear, fascination, and a sense of supernatural dread. For the people who experienced the events firsthand, the lights are not just an abstract mystery, but a part of their history, woven into the fabric of the island's identity. Elders who lived through the 1977 incidents often speak of the lights in hushed tones, treating them as something almost sacred and certainly dangerous. In community gatherings and family stories, the lights are recounted with reverence, as though they were something more than mere lights, something that carried an intelligence and awareness beyond human comprehension. In Brazilian media, the Colares incident has inspired a range of interpretations, influencing documentaries, books, films, and even popular music. News outlets return to the story periodically, especially as anniversaries of the events approach, interviewing locals and examining any new evidence that emerges. Through these retellings, the Colares lights have become part of the national folklore, a tale of wonder and fear that serves as a constant reminder of the unexplained. Though the incidents of 1977 marked the peak of activity, locals and visitors alike have occasionally reported seeing strange lights over the water or floating above the island, often on misty nights or during electrical storms. These sightings are infrequent and fleeting, but they serve as reminders that the mystery has not entirely disappeared. Each sighting renews the islanders' memories, rekindling the quiet fear that the lights might one day return in full force. Younger generations in Colares approach the story with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity, having grown up with tales from parents and grandparents who lived through the original events. Some youth dismiss the stories as exaggerations, but others are drawn to them, intrigued by the possibility that their small island played host to something otherworldly. The occasional sightings serve as fuel for this intrigue, sparking whispered conversations and cautious stargazing among those who hope or fear that they might glimpse the lights themselves. The lights of Colares have become a lens through which people grapple with the unknown, a reminder that there are still mysteries in the world that elude simple answers. In the end, Colares stands as a reminder of humanity's fascination with what lies beyond the veil of understanding. It is both a scientific puzzle and a piece of Brazilian folklore, a story that resonates because it speaks to our deepest fears and most profound curiosity. The lights have faded from the skies, but the mystery endures, casting its shadow over each new generation, a legacy that refuses to be forgotten.